40 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 40 seconds. I'm going to tell you what happened in those 40 seconds, every detail, every shift, every breath, but first I need you to see the image. Just the image. Before the story. Before the dojo. Before the champion's name or weight or titles. Before any of that. 2 hands around a throat. That's the image. 2 hands, thick, white-knuckled, the tendons standing up like cables under the skin wrapped around a throat. The throat belongs to a man who weighs 140 pounds. The hands belong to a man who weighs 240. The hands are squeezing. Now here's the part that broke the room. The man being choked, his hands are at his sides. Both of them. Down. Open. Fingers loose. Not reaching up. Not gripping the wrists. Not clawing at the fingers. Not doing anything. His arms are hanging the way your arms hang when you're waiting for an elevator. Relaxed. Uninvolved. Someone is choking him and his hands didn't get the memo. That man was Bruce Lee. And I need to freeze this image right here. I need to hold it. I need you to carry this image, the 2 hands on the throat, the arms at the sides, the calm face above the white knuckles. I need you to carry it because I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it for a while. I'm going to tell you how this happened and who the champion was and why Bruce was in that dojo and what my father told me about the man who saw it. I'm going to leave the image. But the image doesn't leave. The image stays. The image is the thing we're walking toward for the next hour. Every word I say from now until the end is walking back to this image. 2 hands on a throat. Arms at his sides. 40 seconds. Now. Let me tell you about those hands. The hands belonged to a judo champion. I'm not going to say his name because the chain that brought me this story didn't carry the name. The chain carried the body. The chain carried the weight, 240 pounds. The chain carried the titles, national level. The chain carried the years, 15 on the mat. The chain carried the hands. The chain always carries the hands. When my father told me this story, and I'll tell you how my father got it in a minute, my father started with the hands. Not the face. Not the height. Not the titles. The hands. My father said, "This guy's hands." And then my father paused. My father paused the way people pause when the word they need doesn't exist and they're waiting for the language to catch up to the memory. And then my father said, like catcher's mitts. But faster. Catcher's mitts but faster. That's a judo champion's hands. That's 15 years of gripping GIs, gripping sleeves, gripping lapels, gripping wrists, gripping necks, gripping everything, thousands of hours of gripping until the fingers become tools that don't behave like fingers anymore. A normal man's fingers tire. A normal man's grip has a clock, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, and the clock runs out and the grip opens whether the man wants it to or not. A judo champion's fingers don't have a clock. A judo champion's fingers closed 3 years ago and haven't opened since. The grip is not effort. The grip is architecture. The grip is how the hand is built now, after 15 years of building. These were the hands on Bruce Lee's throat. I want you to understand the weight behind the hands. 240 pounds. In the late 1960s, in American Judo, 240 was not common. 240 was the upper edge. 240 meant the man was not just trained, the man was built. The man was a structure. The man was thick in the way that certain bodies are thick, not fat, not swollen, but dense. Dense the way a tree stump is dense. You could push a tree stump all day and the tree stump would not be in a different place at the end of the day than it was at the beginning. That was this man. 240 pounds of man who had spent 15 years learning how to put his 240 pounds into his hands. And his hands were on Bruce Lee's throat. Now I have to tell you about the throat. I have to tell you about what it means in the body. What it means in the brain to have hands on your throat. Because this is the thing that makes this story different from every other Bruce Lee story you've ever heard. You've heard the stories about the speed. You've heard the stories about the punch. You've heard the stories about the kick and the block and the 1-inch punch and the demonstrations where Bruce did something so fast that the people watching couldn't process it until it was over. You've heard those stories. Those stories are about things Bruce did. Actions Bruce took. Speed Bruce generated. This story is about something Bruce didn't do. This story is about a throat. The throat is the one place on the body where the brain cannot negotiate. The brain can negotiate with pain. The brain can tell itself that the broken finger is manageable, that the bruised rib is survivable, that the twisted ankle will heal. The brain can negotiate with almost anything. But the brain cannot negotiate with the throat. The throat is where the brain keeps the things it cannot lose: air and blood. Air goes through the trachea. Blood goes through the carotids. Both of these live in the throat. Both of these travel through 3 inches of soft, unprotected tissue between the jaw and the clavicle. When hands close around that tissue, the brain does not negotiate. The brain panics. The brain sends a signal, not a suggestion, not a request, a signal, a command, an override, and the signal says, remove the hands. Remove them now. The signal goes to the arms and the arms go up and the hands grab the thing that is on the throat and the body fights. This is not a decision. This is not bravery or cowardice. This is not will. This is wiring. This is a million years of evolution screaming through every nerve in the body. Something is on your throat. Remove it. Every human being who has ever lived has this wiring. Every body that has ever existed responds to a throat grab the same way: arms up, hands to the threat, pull, claw, remove. Babies do it. Soldiers do it. Fighters do it. It is the deepest, oldest, least negotiable reflex in the human body. Bruce Lee's arms stayed at his sides. I need you to sit with that. I need you to feel the weight of that. Not the weight of the champion's hands, the weight of what Bruce's body was doing. Or rather, what Bruce's body was not doing. Bruce's body was overriding the oldest reflex in the human operating system. Bruce's body was receiving the signal, hands on throat, remove them, and Bruce's body was saying no. Not later. Not in a minute. No. Now. The signal is received and the signal is denied, and the arms stay down and the hands stay open and the throat handles it alone. This is not strength. Strength is what the champion was using. Strength is muscles contracting, tendons pulling, bones leveraging. Strength is physics. What Bruce was doing was not physics. What Bruce was doing was something else. Something that the people standing in that dojo, the students on the tatami, the instructors against the wall, something that those people had never seen and could not name and would spend years trying to describe to other people at dinner tables and in parking lots and in phone calls and in all the places where stories travel when the stories are too heavy to keep inside. This is that story. It came to me through 4 hands. I'm the 5th. Let me tell you about the other 4. But first, Tim. Before the chain. Before my father. Before the hands that carried this story to me. First, the champion. Because you need to know who was on the other end of those hands. You need to know the size of the thing that Bruce Lee's throat was ignoring. 240 pounds. I said that. But I said it as a number, and a number is just a number, and a number doesn't sweat, and a number doesn't breathe, and a number doesn't stand in front of you with its hands on your throat. So let me make the number into a body. 6'1". That's the height. 6'1" and 240 pounds. In the late 1960s, in the world of American Judo, that was a body that filled doorframes. That was a body that changed the shape of a room when it entered. You knew where that body was. You knew where that body was the way you know where the stove is, not because you're looking at it, but because your body is tracking it, your body is aware of it, your body has registered the heat and filed it under things that are nearby and powerful. The champion's neck was the first thing people described. Not his hands, though the hands were remarkable. Not his shoulders, though the shoulders were the whitest thing in most rooms he entered. The neck. The champion's neck was the thing that people mentioned first and mentioned again and could not stop mentioning because the neck did not look like a neck. The neck looked like a continuation of the shoulders. The neck looked like the shoulders had decided to keep going up, past the clavicle, past the place where a normal neck begins to narrow, up without narrowing, up in a straight column of muscle that connected the shoulders to the jaw without any concession to taper. A neck like that is not built in a gym. A neck like that is built on a mat. 15 years on a mat. 15 years of people trying to choke you and you not being choked. 15 years of your neck resisting collar chokes and arm chokes and triangle chokes and every variation of hands and arms and legs that another human body can wrap around a throat. 15 years of that and the neck adapts. The neck becomes something other than a neck. The neck becomes a pillar. The neck becomes the thing that tells everyone in the room, this man has been choked by professionals for 15 years and this man is still here and his neck is still here and his neck is thicker now than it was when the choking started. That was the champion's neck. Now the hands. My father described the hands twice. My father described them the first time in his workshop, standing at his bench, holding a wrench, and he put the wrench down to describe the hands because the wrench was suddenly inadequate. The wrench was suddenly a toy in the context of the hands he was describing. And my father described them the second time in the kitchen years later, coffee in the brown mug, the mug with the chip, and the second time my father described the hands, my father used his own hands to show me. My father put his hands on the kitchen table and spread his fingers and said, like this. But thicker. Every finger thicker. And then my father paused and touched the web of skin between his thumb and forefinger. This part was like leather. Like old leather. Like the leather on a belt that's been bent 1,000 times. The web between the thumb and forefinger. That's where Judo lives. That's the contact point, the place where the hand meets the GI, the place where the grip originates. The place that takes the friction and the tension and the torque of every throw and every hold and every grip fight for 15 years. That web of skin becomes something else. That web of skin becomes a callus that is not a callus, it's deeper than a callus, it's structural, it's a reorganization of the tissue itself, the skin thickening and the fascia underneath thickening and the whole architecture of the hand reshaping itself around the act of gripping. The champion's hands had been reshaped. The champion's hands were not the hands he was born with. The champion's hands were the hands that 15 years of judo had built. The champion's hands were tools. The champion's hands could close around a wooden dowel, a 1-inch wooden dowel, a broomstick, a mop handle, and the champion could hold the dowel against a pull that two men could not generate. Two men pulling. The champion holding. The dowel staying. That's the grip. That's what 15 years of judo puts into a pair of hands. Those hands were on Bruce Lee's throat. I need to tell you about the titles because the titles matter. Not because titles prove anything, the titles don't prove anything, titles are paper, titles are ceremonies and trophies and photographs, but because titles tell you about the rooms the champion had been in. The rooms the champion had survived. National level judo in the late 1960s in America was not what it became later. National level judo in the late 1960s was a room full of men who had come from military judo programs and university judo programs and independent dojos where the training was closer to combat than to sport, and the throws were not gentle and the chokes were not released early and the injuries were the kind that changed the shape of your skeleton. The champion had been in those rooms. The champion had been in those rooms and the champion had won in those rooms, and the champion had walked out of those rooms with his hand raised and his GI soaked and his body carrying the memories of every throw he'd taken and every choke he'd survived and every grip fight he'd won. The champion's body was a record. The champion's body was a document. Every thick finger, every calloused palm, every degree of extra circumference on that impossible neck, every bit of it was a sentence in a document that read, "This man has been fighting for 15 years and this man is still fighting and this man has not been beaten by anything he has put his hands on." Until the throat. The champion had not been beaten by anything he had put his hands on until he put his hands on Bruce Lee's throat. And I'm going to tell you what happened when he did. I'm going to tell you about the 40 seconds. I'm going to tell you about the face changing 3 times. I'm going to tell you about the students on the tatami and the instructors against the wall and the silence that fell over that room like a sheet over a body. But first I have to tell you how I know. First I have to tell you about the chain. Because the chain matters. The chain is the reason this story exists in my mouth. The chain is the 4 hands that carried this story from a dojo in the late 1960s to a kitchen table where my father sat with a chipped mug and told me about hands on a throat and a man who didn't move. The chain is everything. Without the chain, there is no story. There is only a thing that happened in a room full of people, most of them dead now, most of them gone, most of them carrying their version of those 40 seconds to whatever place memories go when the body that holds them stops. The chain kept this one alive. Let me show you the chain. The chain has 4 links. The first link is a man who was standing on the tatami. I don't have his name. The chain didn't carry the name. The chain carried what the man saw, and what the man saw was so specific, so physical, so burned into the man's memory that when the man told the story, the details were not the details of a man remembering. The details were the details of a man reliving. There's a difference. Remembering is reconstruction. Reliving is replay. Remembering says, I think the hands were on the throat. Reliving says, the left thumb was higher than the right thumb and the right pinky was overlapping the left pinky at the back of the neck and Bruce's chin was tilted up 4 degrees, not 5, not 3, 4, because the angle of the champion's wrists forced the chin up by exactly that amount. The man on the tatami was reliving. The second link is the man the first man told. I don't have this name either. This man was a martial artist, not judo, something else, something adjacent, the kind of man who ran in the same circles and trained in the same neighborhoods and showed up at the same demonstrations and knew the same people. This man heard the story from the first man and this man carried it for years. Carried it the way you carry a stone in your pocket, not because you need it, not because it's useful, but because your hand keeps going back to it, your fingers keep finding the shape of it, and every time your fingers find the shape of it, The stone tells you something you haven't finished understanding. The third link is my father. My father met the second man, I don't know where, I don't know when exactly, sometime in the early 70s, sometime in the period when my father was collecting stories the way other men collected stamps or coins or baseball cards. My father was not a martial artist. My father was a mechanic. My father worked with his hands. My father's hands were thick and scarred and permanently stained in the creases with grease that no soap could reach and no scrubbing could remove. My father's hands were tools. And my father understood tools. And my father understood hands. And when the second man told my father about the champion's hands on Bruce Lee's throat, my father understood the hands before he understood the story. My father heard the story. My father carried the story. My father carried it the way the second man carried it, in the pocket, the hand going back to it, the fingers finding the shape. The fourth link is the kitchen table. Brown mug. Chipped rim. Coffee black, no sugar, the way my father drank it, the way my father always drank it, the mug cupped in both hands like the mug was the last warm thing on earth. Saturday morning. Or Sunday morning. One of those mornings where the house was quiet and my father was talking and I was listening and the stories came out like smoke, slow, curling, finding their shape in the air between us. My father said, "Let me tell you about the time a judo champion grabbed Bruce Lee by the throat." And I was the fifth link. I'm the fifth link. I'm the mouth the story is in now. I'm the last set of hands. And I'm telling it the way it was told to me, with the details that survived the chain and the gaps that the chain created in the places where I don't know, and I'll tell you I don't know, and you'll have to decide for yourself whether the shape of the story is close enough to the shape of what happened. That's the chain. 4 links. 1 witness. 2 carriers. My father. Me. That's the source. Here's the scene. A dojo in the late 1960s. Los Angeles. Or near Los Angeles. The chain didn't carry the exact address. The chain carried the room. The room was a judo dojo, traditional, Japanese style, the kind of dojo that existed in Los Angeles in the 60s before the strip mall karate schools took over, before the franchise model turned martial arts into a retail business with locations and logos and monthly membership fees. This was not that. This was a room. A room with tatami on the floor and wooden beams overhead and rice paper screens along one wall that let the light in but turned the light into something softer, something filtered, something that fell on the tatami in pale rectangles that moved as the sun moved and gave the room a quality of slow time, a quality of a room where the clock on the wall was decorative, where time was measured not in minutes but in rounds, in throws, in the number of times a body hit the mat and stood up again. The room smelled like work. I don't know if you've ever been inside a judo dojo. I don't know if you've ever smelled tatami. Tatami has a smell, a base smell, a factory smell, a smell of compressed straw and vinyl and the faint chemical trace of whatever treatment they put on the surface to make it durable. That's the base smell. That's the smell when the dojo is empty. When the dojo is full, when bodies have been thrown on the tatami for 10 years, for 15 years, the base smell disappears under layers. Sweat. Not the sharp, thin sweat of a man who has been running on a treadmill. The thick, heavy sweat of a man who has been carrying another man's weight, the sweat of effort that is not aerobic but structural, the sweat of a body that is working not to move fast but to move something that does not want to be moved. That sweat soaks into the tatami. That sweat becomes the tatami. After 15 years, the tatami is sweat. The tatami is the accumulated residue of every body that has ever worked on its surface. The dojo smelled like 15 years of that. And something else. Something under the sweat. Something my father mentioned only once, offhand, the way my father mentioned things that were important as if they were unimportant, as if they were details that didn't matter, which was always how I knew they mattered most. My father said, the guy said the place smelled like medicine. Like menthol or something. Like the cream they put on joints. Analgesic cream. Bengay or Tiger Balm or whatever they used in the late 60s. The smell of camphor and menthol, the smell that lives in the air of every serious training facility where the bodies are old enough and the training is hard enough that the bodies need chemistry to continue. The smell of bodies that have been damaged and damaged again and repaired again, and the repairs are now permanent. The tubes of cream are now fixtures. The smell of menthol is now as much a part of the room as the smell of sweat. The dojo smelled like sweat and menthol and tatami. The dojo smelled like work and pain and the effort to continue despite the pain. That's the room. The room was occupied. Students, 6, 8, maybe more. The count shifted depending on which link of the chain was telling it, seated along the far wall in white GIs, cross-legged on the tatami, arranged in a row the way students arrange themselves in a traditional dojo, junior on one end, senior on the other, the position in the line telling you everything you needed to know about the hierarchy without a single word. The students were seated because the mat was not theirs. The mat belonged to the demonstration. The mat belonged to whatever was about to happen. Two instructors stood against the wall behind the students. One in a dark hakama, the traditional divided skirt that senior judo practitioners wear over their gi, the garment that says, "I am not here to be thrown, I am here to watch." The other instructor, the chain wasn't clear on what the second instructor was wearing. The chain was clear on the arms. The second instructor had his arms crossed. The second instructor's arms were crossed the way a man's arms cross when the man is waiting to be convinced. The arms said, "Show me." The arms said, "I've seen a lot and most of it hasn't impressed me, and I'm standing here with my arms crossed because my arms don't uncross for free." That's the room. Tatami. Beams. Screens. Light falling in pale rectangles. The smell of sweat and menthol and compressed straw. Students on the floor. Instructors against the wall. The mat open. The mat waiting. And into this room, Bruce Lee. I need to pause here. I need to pause here because there is something my father used to do in his workshop that I didn't understand when I was young and that I understand now, and the understanding came from this story and from the way this story works and from the way Bruce Lee entered a room. My father was a mechanic. My father worked on engines. My father's workshop was a two-car garage with a concrete floor and a pegboard on the wall and tools hanging on the pegboard in an order that made sense to my father and to no one else. The tools were clean. The floor was clean. My father's hands were dirty permanently, irreversibly dirty, but the tools were clean and the floor was clean and the workshop was organized the way a church is organized, everything in its place, the place mattering more than the thing. My father used to hold things. Not use things. Not fix things. Hold things. Before he would work on a part, a carburetor, a gasket, a valve cover, my father would hold it. My father would pick it up and hold it and turn it in his hands and look at it the way you look at a face you haven't seen in a long time. Not examining. Not inspecting. Looking. Seeing. Understanding the shape of the thing before the thing was asked to perform. I asked my father once why he did that. My father said, "Because the part knows what it's supposed to do. I just have to listen to the shape." I didn't understand that when I was 11. I understand it now. My father said something else in his workshop years later. different day, different mug, same coffee, my father said, don't squeeze. Hold. That's the difference. When you squeeze, you're working. When you hold, the thing is working. My father opened his hands and closed them slowly, gently, the way you close your hands around a bird. You're just there. Don't squeeze. Hold. The champion squeezed. Bruce held. The champion was working. Bruce was just there. My father knew the difference between squeezing and holding. My father learned it from engines and gaskets and valve covers. Bruce Lee knew the difference. Bruce Lee learned it from something else. I don't know what. The chain didn't carry that. The chain carried the fact. Bruce held. The champion squeezed. The throat didn't move. That's the bridge. That's my father's hands reaching across 30 years to touch Bruce Lee's throat and make sense of it. Back to the dojo. Bruce entered the dojo. This is from the first link, The Man on the Tatami. The Man on the Tatami described how Bruce entered. The Man on the Tatami described it specifically. The Man on the Tatami described it the way you describe a thing that you didn't know was important until later, until the hands were on the throat, until the 40 seconds started, until the room stopped breathing, and then you went back in your memory and you replayed the entrance and you realized the entrance had told you everything. The entrance had been the answer. You just didn't know the question yet. Bruce took off his shoes. Bruce took off his shoes at the edge of the tatami. This is standard. This is protocol. You do not step on the tatami with shoes. But the way Bruce took off his shoes, the man on the tatami noticed. The man on the tatami noticed because Bruce did not bend down. Bruce did not sit. Bruce did not lean against a wall. Bruce used one foot to remove the other shoe, standing, not looking down, and then used the bare foot to remove the second shoe, and during the removal of the shoes, during both removals, Bruce was looking at the room. Not at the floor. Not at the shoes. At the room. Bruce was scanning. Not nervously. Not the scan of a man looking for exits or threats or allies. The scan of a man reading a room the way my father read a part, turning it, seeing it, understanding the shape. Bruce's eyes moved from the tatami to the students to the instructors to the beams to the windows, and the eyes moved at a speed that was neither fast nor slow. The eyes moved at the speed of comprehension, the speed at which information becomes understanding. Bruce stepped onto the tatami. Barefoot. The tatami took his weight and the tatami did not compress. 140 pounds does not compress tatami. 240 pounds compresses tatami. The champion, who was already on the mat, who was already standing in the center of the room, who was already waiting, the champion's feet had made dents. Visible dents. The champion was standing in his own footprints. The champion's weight had reshaped the surface he was standing on. Bruce's feet left no marks. The man on the tatami noticed this. The man on the tatami noticed this the way you notice a sentence in a book that doesn't seem important until the last page. Bruce's feet left no marks. Bruce walked across the tatami and the tatami behind him was the same as the tatami in front of him. No dents. No compression. No record of his passing. 140 pounds walking on a surface that a 240-pound man was standing on. One man left marks. One man didn't. I don't know what this means. I'm not going to tell you what this means. I'm going to tell you that the man on the tatami noticed it, and the man on the tatami told the second link, and the second link told my father, and my father told me, and I'm telling you, and every person in the chain noticed it, and every person in the chain mentioned it because it was the first sign. It was the first signal. It was the first indication that the 40 seconds that hadn't started yet, the 40 seconds that were still waiting in the near future like a wave that hasn't broken, the first indication that those 40 seconds were going to be something that no one in the room was prepared for. Bruce walked to the center of the mat. Bruce looked at the champion. The champion looked at Bruce. And the room, the students, the instructors, the tatami, the beams, the light falling in pale rectangles through the rice paper screens, the room held its breath. Not yet. Not the 40 seconds yet. First, the invitation. Here's what I don't know. I don't know who arranged this. I don't know who called whom. I don't know if Bruce sought out the champion or the champion sought out Bruce, or a third party, an instructor, a mutual friend, a man who knew both worlds, set the meeting in motion. The chain didn't carry the arrangement. The chain carried the room and the bodies and the hands and the throat and the 40 seconds. The arrangement, the phone call, the conversation, the agreement, the logistics of getting a judo champion and Bruce Lee into the same dojo on the same afternoon, the arrangement fell out of the chain somewhere between the first link and the second. What I know is this: it was understood. It was understood by everyone in the room that this was a demonstration. Not a fight. Not a match. Not a contest. A demonstration. The word matters. The word matters because the word sets the rules, or rather, the word sets the absence of rules. In a fight, there are rules. In a match, there are rules. In a contest, there are rules. In a demonstration, there is only a question. The question is, can you? The answer is, watch. The question that day, the question that the room was asking, the question that the students on the tatami were asking, the question that the instructors against the wall were asking, the question that the champion himself was asking, the question was about the throat. I'm going to tell you how it happened. The chain carried this part clearly. The chain carried this part the way a river carries a heavy stone, slowly, carefully, the current wrapping itself around every surface of the stone arriving downstream with every edge intact. Bruce and the champion stood in the center of the mat. They were facing each other. 5 feet apart. Maybe 6. Close enough to see each other's eyes, but far enough that neither man was inside the other man's reach. The distance was deliberate. The distance was the distance of two animals who are not yet sure if the encounter is friendly. The distance was respect measured in feet. The champion spoke first. The chain didn't carry the exact words. The chain carried the meaning. The meaning was, I want to test something. The meaning was, I've heard about you. The meaning was, my hands are the strongest part of my body and they have never failed me, and I want to know if they will fail me now. The champion proposed a grip. This is judo. This is what judo does. Judo is the art of the grip. Judo is the art of taking hold of another human body and using the hold to destroy the body's balance, to redirect the body's momentum, to put the body on the ground in a way that the body did not choose and cannot reverse. Everything in judo begins with the grip. The grip is the first word. The grip is the sentence that the rest of the throw is built on. Without the grip, there is no throw. Without the grip, there is no judo. The champion wanted to grip. The champion proposed, and this is where the story turns. This is where the 40 seconds begin to take shape in the room like a weather system forming over open water. The champion proposed a specific grip. A throat grip. The champion proposed to put his hands on Bruce Lee's throat, and Bruce Lee was to try to remain standing, was to try to maintain his position, was to try to resist whatever the champion's hands and the champion's 240 pounds chose to do from the grip. The assumption that everyone in the room shared, the assumption that the champion certainly shared, the assumption that 15 years of judo and 240 pounds of body and a national title and hands like catcher's mitts had built and reinforced and made into an article of faith, the assumption was that the grip would work. The assumption was that the champion would grip the throat, and from the throat the champion would control the body, and from the control the champion would execute a throw, a takedown, a sweep, something, anything, some movement that would put Bruce Lee on the mat. The assumption was physics. The assumption was that 240 pounds gripping 140 pounds is not a question. 240 gripping 140 is an answer. The answer is the mat. The 140 goes to the mat. Every time. Without exception. Without negotiation. The laws of physics have been consulted, and the laws of physics have rendered their verdict, and the verdict is the mat. That was the assumption. Bruce said yes. I want you to hear that. I want you to hear the yes. Because the yes is as important as anything that happens next. The yes is as important as the 40 seconds. The yes is the act that makes the 40 seconds possible. Bruce Lee, 140 pounds, 5'7", slim, wearing a dark t-shirt and dark trousers. No GI, no belt, no armor, no padding, no protection. Bruce Lee said yes to a national-level judo champion putting both hands on his throat. Bruce Lee said yes to 240 pounds of trained grip and trained weight and trained technique being applied to the most vulnerable point on his body. Bruce Lee said yes the way you say yes to a glass of water. No pause. No conditions. No negotiation. No wait, let me warm up. No, let me remove my shirt. No, let me get into a stance. No preparation. The yes was immediate, and the yes was complete, and the yes contained no reservation and no caveat and no indication that Bruce Lee considered the proposition to be anything other than ordinary. A champion wants to choke me. Yes. The way you say yes to a question about the weather. The way you say yes when someone asks if you'd like a cup of coffee. The casualness of the yes, the lightness of it, the absence of weight in it. The man on the tatami noticed the yes. The man on the tatami told the second link, he said yes like it was nothing. Like the guy had asked him to pass the salt. Pass the salt. A 240-pound judo champion wants to put his hands on your throat, and you say yes the way you say pass the salt. The champion stepped forward. The champion closed the 5 or 6 feet of distance in 2 steps, big steps, heavy steps, the kind of steps that the tatami remembers, the kind of steps that leave dents. The champion closed the distance, and the champion was now inside range, and the champion's hands were rising, and the champion's hands were opening, and the hands were reaching for Bruce Lee's throat. And Bruce stood still. Bruce did not step back. Bruce did not flinch. Bruce did not raise his hands. Bruce did not tuck his chin. Bruce did not do any of the things that a body does when a large body moves toward it with intent. Bruce stood still. Bruce stood still the way the floor stands still. The way the wall stands still. The way a thing stands still that is not in the category of things that move when other things approach. The champion's hands reached the throat. The champion's hands closed around the throat. The fingers wrapped. The thumbs found their position, front of the neck, soft tissue, trachea territory. The remaining fingers 8, for on each side, wrapped around the sides and the back, and the fingertips dug into the muscle, and the grip closed, and the grip was complete, and the champion's hands were on Bruce Lee's throat, and the champion's hands were squeezing. The 40 seconds started. The champion's hands started doing what the champion's hands had always done. The champion's hands started working. The grip tightened. The thumbs pressed. The fingers constricted. The champion shifted his weight forward, 240 pounds tilting into the grip, the balls of the feet driving into the tatami, the center of gravity moving from the champion's hips to the champion's hands, the full mass of the body channeling through the arms and the wrists and the fingers into the throat. And Bruce didn't move. The champion pulled. Pulling is the first thing a judo player does from a grip. Pulling is the initiation. Pulling is the grip becoming a technique, the hands on the throat becoming not just a hold but a weapon, the hold becoming a lever, the lever becoming a throw. The champion pulled down into the side, the classic kuzushi, the breaking of balance, the first syllable of every judo throw ever thrown. The champion pulled with his arms and his back and his legs and his 240 pounds. The champion pulled to break Bruce's balance. Bruce's balance did not break. The champion pulled and Bruce's body did not tilt. Bruce's body did not shift. Bruce's body did not lean. Bruce's body did not do any of the things that bodies do when 240 pounds of judo champion pulls their throat down into the side. Bruce's body stayed where it was. Bruce's feet stayed where they were. Bruce's center of gravity, that invisible point inside the body around which everything else rotates, the point that judo is specifically, precisely, obsessively designed to displace, Bruce's center of gravity did not move. The champion pulled again. Different angle. Different direction. The champion was not stupid. The champion was not repeating a failed technique. The champion was adapting, reading the resistance, finding the line of force, recalculating the angle, applying the pull in a new direction, seeking the weakness, probing for the gap in the structure. This is what 15 years of judo teaches you. This is what a national title means. It means that when the first pull doesn't work, you don't pull harder. You pull smarter. You pull differently. You find the angle that the body wasn't prepared for. The champion found a new angle. The champion pulled. Bruce didn't move. The champion's face changed. Not yet. Not the 3 changes. Not yet. This was the first flicker. This was the moment before the first change, the moment when the champion's face was still the face of a man working, the face of a man doing his job, the face of a man whose hands were on a throat and whose hands were doing what they always did, and the only unusual thing, the only slightly unusual thing, was that the throat was not cooperating. The champion adjusted. The champion released the pull, not the grip, never the grip. The grip stayed, the fingers stayed wrapped, the thumbs stayed pressed, but the pull stopped and the champion shifted to compression. Pure compression. Squeeze without direction. Squeeze without technique. Squeeze is an act of force, raw, unrefined, 240 pounds of grip strength closing on a throat the way a hydraulic press closes on a can. And here is where I leave the champion for a moment. Here is where I step away from the hands on the throat and the pull that failed and the compression that was beginning. Here is where I tell you what Bruce Lee's body was doing. Because the champion was doing everything. Bruce was doing nothing. And the nothing was the loudest thing in the room. V15, 3/5, 5 to 6. underscore 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 underscore. Chapter 5, 40 seconds red circle H. I'm going to slow down now. I'm going to slow down because the next 40 seconds happened in real time and I want you to feel them in real time. I want you to feel what the room felt. I want you to feel what the students on the tatami felt and what the instructors against the wall felt and what the champion felt and what Bruce Lee's throat felt. I want you to feel the seconds. Not as a number, not as 40 seconds the way you say 40 minutes or 40 days. I want you to feel each second as a unit of experience. Each second as a room you walk through. Each second as a space with walls and a floor and a ceiling and air, and the air has a temperature and the temperature is rising. The champion's hands are on Bruce Lee's throat. The grip is full. The thumbs are pressed into the anterior triangle, the soft zone above the sternal notch where the trachea sits like a garden hose behind a thin layer of muscle and skin. The remaining fingers are wrapped around the lateral and posterior neck, the sternocleidomastoid on both sides, the trapezius in the back, the fingers overlapping, the grip so complete that the champion's hands have become a collar, a human collar, a collar made of bone and tendon and 15 years of training. The champion is squeezing. Second 1. The champion squeezes and the squeeze is professional. The squeeze is not panic. The squeeze is not anger. The squeeze is technique. The champion knows how to squeeze a throat. The champion has squeezed throats in competition, has applied chokes that have put men to sleep in 11 seconds, has felt the moment when a throat gives, the moment when the resistance collapses and the body goes slack and the referee steps in. The champion knows the sequence. The champion knows the timeline. A throat gives. A throat always gives. The question is not if. The question is when. The champion squeezes and waits. Bruce doesn't move. Second 5. The champion has been squeezing for 5 seconds. 5 seconds of full compression. 5 seconds of 240 pounds channeled through 2 hands into one throat. In competition, 5 seconds of this choke would produce visible effects. The face would redden. The eyes would bulge slightly, the body would begin to sag, the hands would come up, the hands would always come up, the hands would grab and pull and claw because the body wants to breathe and the body will sacrifice dignity and strategy and technique and everything else to get the hands off the throat so the body can breathe. Bruce's hands are at his sides. Bruce's face has not changed color. Bruce's eyes have not widened. Bruce's body has not sagged. Bruce is standing the way Bruce was standing before the hands arrived. Upright. Still. Vertical. His chin is tilted up slightly, not by choice, not by design, but by geometry. The champion's wrists force the chin up by a few degrees. The champion's thumbs pressing into the anterior triangle create an upward vector that lifts the chin. This is the only change in Bruce's posture. This is the only evidence, the only visible, physical, observable evidence that anything is happening to Bruce Lee at all. The chin. Tilted up. 4 degrees. Everything else the same. Second 8. The champion shifts. The champion shifts because 8 seconds have passed and the throat has not given, and the champion's training is telling the champion that something is wrong. Not wrong in the sense of dangerous. Wrong in the sense of unfamiliar. The champion's training is a library, 15 years of data, thousands of grips, thousands of throats, thousands of moments where the grip was applied and the body responded, and the response was predictable because bodies are predictable, bodies follow rules, bodies do what physics and anatomy say they will do. The Champion's Library has no entry for this. The Champion's Library has no chapter called "The Throat Doesn't Respond." The Champion's Library has no page that says, "You will squeeze and nothing will happen." The Champion shifts his thumbs. The Champion moves his thumbs half an inch, maybe less, a micro-adjustment, the kind of adjustment that only 15 years of grappling can produce, the kind of adjustment that is not thought but felt, the hands reading the throat the way my father's hands read a carburetor. The thumbs find a new position. The thumbs press. Bruce doesn't move. Second 12. The Champion is 12 seconds into the grip. 12 seconds. In a judo match, 12 seconds of a choke is an eternity. In a judo match, the referee would have stepped in by now. In a judo match, the body being choked would have tapped, hands slapping the mat, the universal signal of surrender, the body saying, "Enough, I concede, let go." In a judo match, 12 seconds of an unreleased choke is a medical event. This is not a judo match. This is a demonstration. And the man being choked has not moved. The students on the tatami are quiet. The students on the tatami were quiet before, but the quiet has changed. The quiet before was the quiet of anticipation, the quiet of people waiting to see something interesting. The quiet now is the quiet of confusion. The quiet now is the quiet of people who are seeing something they don't understand, and the not understanding has taken their voices. One student, the man on the tatami, noticed this. The first link noticed this and carried it through the chain. One student has his mouth slightly open. Not in awe. Not yet. In confusion. The mouth is open because the brain is working, and the brain is using so much energy to process what the eyes are reporting that the brain has forgotten to close the mouth. The mouth is open because the brain is broken. Not broken permanently. Broken the way a computer freezes, the inputs don't match any known pattern, the processing engine has no algorithm for this, the system has encountered a condition it was not designed to handle, and the system is stuck. The student's brain is stuck. The student's mouth is open. The student is watching a 240-pound judo champion choke a 140-pound man, and the 140-pound man is not reacting, and the student's brain cannot find the file. Second 15. The champion changes strategy. The champion has been squeezing for 15 seconds. The throat has not given. The compression has not worked. The champion's thumbs have pressed and shifted and pressed again, and the trachea behind the muscle is exactly where it was at second 1. The champion's fingers have constricted, and the neck behind the fingers is exactly the circumference it was at second 1. Nothing has moved. Nothing has compressed. Nothing has given. The champion decides to pull again. But this pull is different from the pull before the 40 seconds. The pull before the 40 seconds was technique, controlled, precise, directional, the kuzushi of a trained judo player. This pull is frustration. Not anger. The champion is not angry. The champion is confused. The champion is confused the way a locksmith is confused when the pick doesn't work. The locksmith is not angry at the lock. The locksmith is confused by the lock. The locksmith is recalculating. But the recalculation involves force. The recalculation involves pulling harder because the pulling smarter didn't work, and the pulling differently didn't work, and the pulling at new angles didn't work, and the champion has exhausted the technical options, and the only option left is magnitude. The champion pulls. The champion pulls with his arms and his back and his legs. The champion drives his weight backward, 240 pounds shifting from the balls of the feet to the heels, the hips dropping, the center of gravity falling, the entire body becoming a lever with the hands on the throat as the fulcrum. The champion is trying to uproot Bruce Lee. The champion is trying to pull Bruce Lee off his feet by the throat. Bruce's feet stay on the tatami. Bruce's feet stay on the tatami the way a tree's roots stay in the ground. Bruce's feet are not gripping the tatami. Bruce's feet are not braced. Bruce's feet are simply on the tatami and the tatami is simply under Bruce's feet, and the relationship between the feet and the floor is not effort. The relationship between the feet and the floor is fact. Bruce Lee is standing on the ground. A judo champion is pulling his throat. Bruce Lee is standing on the ground. I'm going to say that again because the man on the tatami said it twice and my father said it twice, and I'm going to say it twice because some things need to be said twice before they become real. Bruce Lee is standing on the ground. Second 18. The champion's grip changes again. The champion rotates his wrists inward, a pronation, the thumbs rolling toward each other, the fingers spreading slightly and then reclenching, the grip becoming a torque rather than a compression. The champion is trying to twist the throat. The champion is trying to rotate the neck to apply a rotational force that will disturb the structure, that will break the alignment, that will find the weakness that compression couldn't find and pulling couldn't find. The champion twists. Bruce's head doesn't turn. Bruce's head doesn't turn. The champion is applying rotational force to Bruce's throat and Bruce's head is not turning. The champion's wrists are pronating with the full force of 240 pounds of trained grip and Bruce's head is not turning. The neck is resisting the torque the way a steel beam resists the torque, not by fighting, not by counter-rotating, but by being. The neck is what it is. The neck is where it is. The torque arrives and the neck receives the torque and the neck does nothing with the torque. The torque enters the neck and the torque disappears. The torque does not come out the other side. The torque does not produce rotation. The torque is absorbed. The torque is swallowed. The torque goes into Bruce Lee's neck and the torque ceases to exist. Second 20. Halfway. 20 seconds of a national-level judo champion's full grip and full weight and full technique on Bruce Lee's throat, and Bruce Lee has not moved in Bruce Lee's hands or at his sides, and Bruce Lee's face has not changed expression, and the only evidence that the champion exists, the only proof that 240 pounds of trained force is being applied to this throat at this moment, is the slight upward tilt of the chin. 4 degrees. That's it. That's the total effect of 20 seconds of a judo champion's best effort. 4 degrees of chin tilt. Not caused by distress. Caused by geometry. The room is silent. The room has been silent since the grip started, but the silence at second 20 is a different silence than the silence at second 1. The silence at second 1 was the silence of a room watching something begin. The silence at second 20 is the silence of a room that has forgotten how to make sound. The silence at second 20 is the silence of a room full of people whose understanding of physical reality has just been contradicted by physical reality. The students on the tatami, the 6 or 8 white GI'd bodies seated in a row along the far wall, the students are not watching a demonstration anymore. The students are watching a violation. Not a violent violation. A conceptual violation. A violation of the rules they have spent years learning. A violation of the physics they have spent years trusting. A violation of the certainty, the absolute, inarguable, load-bearing certainty that a 240-pound judo champion can move a 140-pound man from a throat grip. The certainty is gone. The certainty has been gone for about 10 seconds and the students don't know what to replace it with, and the not knowing is the silence. Second 23. The champion does something he has never done. The champion pauses. I need you to understand what this means. A judo champion does not pause during a grip. A judo champion's grip is continuous, the grip is a conversation, the grip is a flow, the grip is a river of micro-adjustments and applications and reapplications and variations that never stops, that never pauses, that never concedes a single moment of inactivity because inactivity is death. Inactivity is the moment when the other body recovers and the other body adjusts and the other body finds its balance again. A judo champion does not pause. This judo champion paused. The hands stayed on the throat. The grip stayed closed. But the effort, the force, the intention, the direction, the effort paused. For a beat. For a breath. For the time it takes a brain to look at the data and say, I need a moment. I need a moment because the data does not match any model I have. I need a moment because I have been gripping this throat for 23 seconds and the throat has not responded and I do not know what this means. The champion paused. And during the pause, the champion looked at Bruce's face. The champion looked at Bruce's face the way you look at a locked door when you realize that none of your keys work and the door is not going to open and you don't know why. The champion looked at Bruce's face for answers. The champion's eyes searched Bruce's eyes for information, for strain, for effort, for pain, for fear, for concentration, for tension, for anything, any signal, any indicator that the throat was working, that the body behind the throat was engaged in the act of resisting. Bruce's eyes looked back. Bruce's eyes looked back and the look in Bruce's eyes was not strain. The look in Bruce's eyes was not effort. The look in Bruce's eyes was not pain or fear or concentration. The look in Bruce's eyes was the look of a man watching. Just watching. The look in Bruce's eyes was the look of a man who was present, fully present, completely present, aware of the hands and the grip and the champion and the room, but not involved. The look was the look of a man standing next to a river, watching the water pass. Interested. Observant. Not wet. Bruce was watching the champion the way you watch weather. Second 25. The champion resumes. The champion resumes because the champion is a champion and a champion does not quit and a champion does not let go and a champion's hands do not open until the champion decides they open and the champion has not decided. The champion resumes with force renewed, recommitted, the pause over, the doubt swallowed, the technique re-engaged. The champion drives his thumbs deeper. The champion constricts his fingers tighter. The champion leans forward, all 240 pounds tilting into the throat, the veins in the champion's forearms standing up like ropes under the skin. The veins in the champion's temples visible, pulsing, the blood pressure of maximum effort making the veins into a roadmap of strain. The champion is working as hard as the champion has ever worked. And Bruce. Bruce is standing on the ground. Bruce's hands are at his sides. Bruce didn't move. Second 28. The champion tries a drop. A sudden downward pull, a yank, almost, a violation of the champion's own technique, a move that a judo player of this level would never use in competition because it is crude and it is graceless and it is the move of a white belt, the move of a beginner who doesn't know anything except pull hard and pull down. The champion tries the white belt move. The champion tries the white belt move because the champion has tried everything else. The champion has tried compression and pulling and torque and shifting and regripping and weight transfer and every tool that 15 years of national level judo has put in the champion's toolbox and none of them have worked and the toolbox is empty and the only thing left is the crude thing, the graceless thing, the desperate thing. The champion yanks down. Bruce's throat goes nowhere. Bruce's chin stays at 4 degrees. Bruce's eyes stay on the champion's face. Bruce didn't move. Second 30. Something changes. Something changes, and the change is not in Bruce. The change is not in the throat. The change is not in the room. The change is in the champion. Something behind the champion's eyes shifts, a tectonic shift, a continental drift, a movement so deep and so fundamental that it changes the topography of the champion's face. The champion's face was the face of a man working. The champion's face was the face of effort and concentration and the kind of focused aggression that 15 years of competition builds into the musculature of the brow and the jaw and the muscles around the eyes. That face was the champion's working face. The champion had worn that face in 100 matches. The champion knew that face the way a carpenter knows his hammer. It was the tool the champion's face became when the champion's hands were working. That face is gone. At second 30, the champion's working face is gone and a new face has arrived, and the new face is the face of a man who is not working anymore. The new face is the face of a man who has stopped. Not the hands haven't stopped, the grip hasn't stopped, the fingers are still wrapped and the thumbs are still pressed and the 240 pounds are still leaning, but something behind the hands has stopped. The engine has stopped. The intention has stopped. The purpose has stopped. The hands are still on the throat, but the hands are no longer trying to do anything to the throat. The hands are on the throat the way your hands are on the steering wheel when you've arrived at your destination and you're sitting in the parked car and you haven't let go yet because you're thinking about something, and the thinking requires your hands to be somewhere, and the steering wheel is where they are. The champion's hands are on Bruce's throat and the champion is thinking. Second 32. The champion's grip loosens. Not completely. Not a release. A loosening. A micro-reduction. A half degree of relaxation in the fingers. The champion's grip has been at 100% for 32 seconds and the grip drops to 95%. Not because the muscles have failed, the muscles could hold for another 30 seconds, another minute, another 5 minutes. The muscles are not the limiting factor. The mind is the limiting factor. The mind has stopped sending the signal that says squeeze. The mind has stopped because the mind has received enough data and the data has been processed, and the conclusion is, this throat does not respond to my hands. This throat does not know my hands are here. Second 34. The champion is looking at Bruce's face. The champion has been looking at Bruce's face since the pause at second 23, 11 seconds of looking, and the champion's expression is changing again. The champion's expression was effort. Then the champion's expression was confusion. Now the champion's expression is something else. Something the man on the tatami could not name. Something the second link could not name. Something my father could not name. Something I cannot name. I'll tell you about that expression. I'll tell you about the three faces. But not yet. Not now. Now we're still in the seconds. Now we're still counting. Second 36. The champion's grip loosens further. 90%. 85. The fingers are uncurling, not releasing, not yet, but uncurling, the death grip becoming a hold, the hold becoming a touch, the touch becoming a question. The champion's hands are no longer squeezing Bruce Lee's throat. The champion's hands are resting on Bruce Lee's throat. The champion's hands are there, but the champion's hands are not doing anything. The champion's hands are present and inactive. The champion's hands are attending but not participating. The champion's hands have given up. The champion's hands have given up, but the champion's hands have not let go, because letting go is a decision and the champion has not made the decision yet. The champion is still processing. The champion is still looking at Bruce's face. The champion is still standing in the wreckage of 36 seconds of total effort that produced no result. No result. Not a small result. Not a partial result. Not well, he moved a little, or well, his face got a little red, or well, I could feel him straining. No result. Zero. The same throat the champion gripped at second 1 is the throat the champion is holding at second 36, and the throat has not changed. The throat has not compressed. The throat has not reddened. The throat has not yielded. The throat at second 36 is the throat at second 0, and the 36 seconds in between have been erased, have been voided, have been retroactively deleted from the physical record. 36 seconds of a judo champion's best effort. Zero effect. Second 38. Bruce moves. Bruce moves for the first time in 38 seconds, and the movement is so small, so minimal, so precisely calibrated that the man on the tatami almost missed it. The man on the tatami almost missed the only movement Bruce Lee made during the entire 40 seconds. Bruce blinked. Bruce blinked. One blink. The eyelids came down and the eyelids went up, and the blink lasted the amount of time a blink lasts, a quarter of a second, maybe less, and the blink was not a blink of discomfort or a blink of exertion or a blink of any kind of physical response to the hands on the throat. The blink was a blink. A regular blink. The blink that human eyes do every 4 to 6 seconds to keep the cornea moist. Bruce's eyes had been open for a while, and Bruce's eyes needed to blink, and Bruce's eyes blinked. That was the movement. That was the total, complete, comprehensive inventory of Bruce Lee's physical response to 38 seconds of a national-level judo champion's grip on his throat. A blink. A regular blink. Second 40. The champion let go. The champion's hands opened. The fingers uncurled, all 10, simultaneously, the grip dissolving like a fist of sand opening over water, the fingers spreading, the hands pulling away from the throat, the hands retreating to the champion's sides, the champion's hands returning to the champion's body as if the hands needed to come home, as if the hands needed to be near the champion's body to feel safe again, as if the hands had been somewhere they did not understand, and the hands needed the familiar geography of the champion's own hips and thighs and sides to remember who they were. The champion let go at second 40. The champion's hands left Bruce's throat, and Bruce's throat was there. Bruce's throat was there the way it had been there at second 0. Unmarked. Undisturbed. Vertical. The chin came down, the 4 degrees resolved, the geometry of the grip dissolved, the chin returning to its natural position. Bruce's chin came down and Bruce's face was level and Bruce's eyes were forward, and Bruce was looking at the champion and the champion was looking at Bruce, and the champion's hands were at the champion's sides and Bruce's hands were at Bruce's sides. Both men's hands were at their sides. But only one man's hands had been there the entire time. The room did not breathe. The room did not breathe because the room had forgotten how. The room had been holding its breath since when? Since second 1? Since second 10? Since the moment the students realized that the throat was not going to give? The room didn't know when it had stopped breathing. The room only knew that it had stopped and that it had not started again, and that the silence in the room was the silence of a room full of people who have witnessed something that does not fit into the world they knew 5 minutes ago. The champion stood in front of Bruce Lee. The champion's hands were empty. The champion's hands had been on the strongest grip they had ever held, and the grip had done nothing, and the hands were empty, and the emptiness was not the emptiness of letting go. The emptiness was the emptiness of failure. Not the failure of the muscles. Not the failure of the technique. The failure of the assumption. The failure of the certainty. The failure of 15 years of training and 240 pounds of body and a national title and hands like catcher's mitts, the failure of all of that to move 140 pounds of man by the throat. 100 pounds of advantage. 40 seconds. 0 result. The champion's hands were empty. And on Bruce Lee's throat, the only evidence, the only mark, the only physical record that the 40 seconds had happened at all, on Bruce Lee's throat, there were red marks. Finger-shaped. Thumb-shaped. The marks of a grip so hard that the capillaries under the skin had burst in the pattern of the champion's hands. The marks were red and the marks were shaped like fingers, and the marks were the only proof. The only proof that a judo champion had tried. The marks would fade. The marks would fade in an hour, maybe 2. The marks would fade because marks fade and skin heals and capillaries repair themselves and the body erases the evidence of things that happened to it. But the story wouldn't fade. The story was already traveling. The story was already leaving the room. The story was already climbing into the first link, the man on the tatami, and the story was already settling into the pocket where it would live for years, the hand going back to it, the fingers finding the shape. 2 hands on a throat. 40 seconds. Arms at his sides. 3 times. The champion's face changed 3 times during the 40 seconds. I mentioned this. I told you about the first change and I told you about the second change and I told you there was a third change that no one in the chain could name. Now I'm going to tell you about each one. Because the champion's face is not a detail. The champion's face is the story. The champion's face is the record, not of what happened to Bruce, but of what happened to the champion. And what happened to the champion is the part of this story that the chain carried with the most care, with the most precision, with the most weight. The chain carried the throat. But the chain loved the face. The first face was the face the champion wore at second one. The first face was the working face. The first face was the face of a man doing something he had done 1,000 times, gripping, squeezing, pulling, applying technique. The first face was the face of professionalism. The brow was tight. The jaw was set. The teeth were together, not clenched, not grinding, but together, the jaw muscles engaged, the masseter firing at a low, sustainable rate, the face of a man who expects the task to be completed within normal parameters. The first face was confidence. The first face was the face of a man who has never put his hands on a thing and had the thing refuse him. The first face was the face of a man whose hands have always worked. Whose grip has always produced results. Whose 240 pounds have always been enough. The first face was the face of certainty, the kind of certainty that is not arrogant, not boastful, not performative, but simply structural. The certainty of a man who has tested his tools in every condition and his tools have never failed. The first face lasted until about second 12. Until about second 12, the champion's face was the working face and the working face was the face the students expected and the instructors expected and the room expected because the room had seen that face before. The room had seen judo champions grip and squeeze and work and the working face was the face they wore during the working. The first face was normal. The first face was the face of a normal thing happening. The first face was the last normal thing that happened in that room. The second face arrived somewhere between second 12 and second 15. The second face arrived the way dawn arrives, not suddenly, not with a sharp border between dark and light, but gradually, incrementally, the darkness becoming less dark and the light becoming less absent until at some point, a point you can't identify, a point that exists only in retrospect. The darkness is gone and the light is here, and you don't know exactly when the change happened, but you know it happened because the world looks different. The champion's face looked different. The brow changed. The brow was tight in the first face, tight with effort, tight with concentration. The brow in the second face was tight with something else. The brow in the second face was tight with confusion. The muscles were the same muscles, the corrugator supercilii, the procerus, the frontalis, the same muscles doing the same thing, pulling the brow down and together, creating the same wrinkles, the same furrows. But the signal behind the muscles had changed. The signal in the first face was, "I am working." The signal in the second face was, "This is not working." The champion's eyes changed. The champion's eyes in the first face were focused on the throat, focused on the grip, focused on the technical task. The champion's eyes in the second face were wider. Not wide. Not the wide eyes of shock or fear. Wider. A millimeter of additional opening. A fraction of additional white showing above and below the iris. The eyes of a man who was looking at something that doesn't match the picture in his head. The champion's mouth changed. The champion's mouth in the first face was closed, lips together, jaw set, the mouth of a man who was breathing through his nose, because breathing through the nose is efficient and the champion is efficient, and the champion's body is a system of efficiencies that 15 years of training have optimized. The champion's mouth in the second face was not open. Not open the way the student's mouth was open. Parted. The lips separated by 1/4 of an inch. The jaw loosened by a fraction. The mouth of a man who has started breathing through his mouth because the work has exceeded the capacity of the nose, or more likely, because the brain has taken over the mouth. The brain has opened the mouth the way the brain opens the mouth when the brain is processing something large, something that requires more oxygen, more cooling, more of whatever the open mouth provides to a brain that is overclocking. The second face was the face of a man encountering a wall. Not a physical wall. The champion had encountered physical walls, the bodies of other champions, the resistance of other grips, the immovability of other structures. The champion knew physical walls. This was not a physical wall. This was a conceptual wall. This was the wall that exists at the edge of your understanding, the wall that you didn't know was there because you never got close enough to see it. The wall that you find only when you've walked to the very edge of everything you know, and you discover that everything you know has an edge, and beyond the edge is something you don't know, and the something you don't know is looking back at you. The champion found the wall. The champion found the wall, and the champion's face showed the finding. The second face was the face of a man standing at the edge of his knowledge, looking past it, seeing something he cannot map. The second face lasted until about second 30. I don't have a word. The chain didn't carry a word. The man on the tatami didn't have a word. The man on the tatami told the second link. His face did something I can't, and then the man on the tatami stopped. The man on the tatami stopped the way my father stopped in the kitchen, the same pause, the same silence, the same waiting for the language to catch up. The man on the tatami stopped, and the second link waited, and the man on the tatami said, it was like he understood something. But the understanding was, and the man on the tatami stopped again. 2 stops. 2 silences. 2 gaps where a word should have been. The second link told my father. The guy said the champion's face changed, and it was like the champion understood something he didn't want to understand. My father told me, the champion's face went somewhere. Somewhere past angry, past confused, past I don't know. Somewhere I don't have a word for. 3 links. 3 attempts. No word. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to describe the third face, and I'm going to fail, and you're going to forgive me for failing, because some faces don't have words and some expressions don't have names, and some moments on a human face are visible but not speakable. The face does something that the language cannot follow. The face goes to a place that the dictionary hasn't mapped. The face arrives at an expression that exists between the words, and the words stand on either side of it, pointing at it, saying, "It's there, it's right there, right between us," and you look between the words and you see it, but you can't say it. The third face. The third face arrived at about second 30. The third face arrived when the champion's hands stopped working, when the effort ceased, when the intention drained, when the hands became passengers on the throat rather than operators. The third face arrived in the silence between the last effort and the letting go. The third face was, close your eyes. Not now, you're reading, but later. Close your eyes later and imagine this. Imagine you are very strong. Imagine you are the strongest version of yourself, not fantasy strong, not superhero strong, but the strongest you have ever been, the peak of your physical capability, the moment in your life when your body was the most powerful tool you had ever owned. Now imagine you take that strength, all of it, everything, the total sum of everything your body can produce, and you apply it to a task. A simple task. A task you have done 1,000 times. A task that has never failed. And you apply your strength and the task does not complete. And you apply more strength and the task does not complete. And you apply everything, every ounce, every fiber, every year of training, every hour of practice, every pound of body weight, and the task does not complete. And the task will not complete. And the task cannot complete. And you know, at some point in those 40 seconds, you know that the task cannot complete, not now, not with more time, not with more force, not with any tool you own or any technique you've learned or any strength you can generate. The task is impossible. Not difficult. Not challenging. Impossible. The throat will not respond to your hands. The throat does not know your hands are there. Now imagine the face you make when you understand that. That's the third face. Respect is close. Respect is in the neighborhood of the third face. But respect is too clean. Respect is a greeting card. Respect is a handshake and a nod and a well done. The third face is not a greeting card. The third face is a man standing at the bottom of something, standing at the bottom of his own understanding, looking up at the size of the thing above him, and the thing above him is not the throat. The thing above him is what the throat represents. The thing above him is the distance between what he can do and what Bruce Lee can do, and the distance is not a gap. The distance is a category. The distance is the difference between a flashlight and the sun, and the man is holding his flashlight and the man is looking at the sun, and the man's face is the face of a man who has just understood that his flashlight and the sun are not the same kind of thing. That's the third face. Fear is close too. But not the fear of danger. Not the fear of being hurt. The fear of being small. The fear that arrives when you discover that the thing you have spent your life building, your strength, your skill, your body, your hands, the thing you have spent your life building is not the biggest thing in the room. The fear that arrives when you discover that the room is bigger than you knew. The third face is fear and respect and something else, something that has no word, braided together into a single expression that lasts for about 10 seconds and then dissolves when the champion lets go. At second 40, the champion lets go. At second 40, the champion's face becomes a face again, a human face, a normal face, the face of a man who has just done something and is now standing in the aftermath of the something. The third face is gone. The third face existed for 10 seconds and the third face is gone, and the third face will never appear on the champion's face again because the third face requires the throat and the throat is no longer in the champion's hands. But the man on the tatami saw it. The man on the tatami saw the third face, and the man on the tatami carried the third face through the chain, and the chain carried the third face to my father, and my father carried the third face to me, and I'm carrying the third face to you, and none of us, not one of us, not one link in the chain, has been able to name it. The third face has no name. The third face is a man understanding something about Bruce Lee's throat that cannot be said in English. Maybe in any language. The champion let go. The champion let go, and the champion's hands returned to the champion's sides, and the champion stood in the center of the tatami with empty hands and a face that was reassembling itself, the third face dissolving, the features rearranging, the expression returning to something recognizable, something human, something that the students against the wall and the instructors in the dark hakama could look at without feeling that they were seeing something private, something they weren't supposed to. See, something that belonged to the champion the way a wound belongs to the body that carries it. The champion stood. Bruce stood. The distance between them was the same distance that had existed before the grip, 5 feet, maybe 6. The champion had stepped back. The champion had stepped back after letting go, and the step back was not retreat. The step back was not fear. The step back was the body needing space. The body needing room. The body needing the physical distance to match the conceptual distance that had just opened up between the champion and the man in front of him. The champion's body needed to be further from Bruce Lee because the champion's brain needed to be further from what had just happened, and the body obliged the brain by stepping back. 5 feet. Maybe 6. The room exhaled. I don't know who exhaled first. The chain didn't carry that. The chain carried the exhale, the collective, simultaneous, audible exhale of a room full of people who had been holding their breath for 40 seconds. The exhale was not quiet. The exhale was the sound of lungs that had been compressed by 40 seconds of tension releasing all at once, a sound like a wave breaking, a sound like a door opening into a pressurized room, a sound that was made of air but felt like something heavier, something that had weight and texture and temperature. The room exhaled and the exhale was warm. The room exhaled and the air in the room changed. The air in the room had been thick the way air gets thick in a room where people are not breathing normally, where the oxygen level has dropped and the carbon dioxide level has risen and the air itself has become a participant in the tension, the air holding the tension the way a sponge holds water. The exhale released the air. The exhale wrung out the sponge. The air became air again. And then nothing. Nothing happened. No one spoke. No one moved. The champion stood with his empty hands. Bruce stood with his hands at his sides. The students sat on the tatami. The instructors stood against the wall. The room was a photograph. The room was a painting. The room was a moment frozen in the amber of nobody knowing what to do next. Because what do you do next? What do you do after 40 seconds of impossible? What do you do after watching a thing that should not have happened happen in front of you? What is the protocol? What is the etiquette? Do you clap? Do you bow? Do you ask questions? Do you pretend it didn't happen? Do you go to lunch? There is no protocol for this. There is no manual. There is no chapter in any martial arts textbook or any judo manual or any book on human behavior that tells you what to do when a 240-pound national-level judo champion grabs a 140-pound man by the throat and the 140-pound man doesn't move and the champion lets go, and now everyone is standing in the room and the room is silent and the silence is the silence of a world. that has just been rearranged. Nobody knew what to do. The champion was the first to move. The champion did something that the man on the tatami described with such specificity, such precision, such detail that I know the man on the tatami was watching the champion the way a painter watches a face, not casually, not peripherally, but with the total attention of a person who knows that what they are seeing is being seen for the last time. The champion looked at his hands. The champion raised his hands slowly, the way you raise your hands to look at a cut, the way you raise your hands after touching something hot, and the champion looked at his hands. The champion looked at his palms. The champion turned his hands over and looked at the backs. The champion spread his fingers and looked at the spaces between the fingers. The champion looked at his hands the way a man looks at a tool that has just failed, not with anger, not with frustration, but with bewilderment. With the specific bewilderment of a man who has trusted a tool for 15 years and the tool has just told him that trust has limits. The champion looked at his hands for a long time. I don't know how long. The chain didn't carry a count. The chain carried the image, the champion, standing on the tatami, his hands raised to chest level, his palms open, his eyes on his own hands, his face, not the third face, not anymore, but an echo of the third face, a residue of the third face having left a mark on the champion's expression the way the champion's grip had left marks on Bruce's throat. The champion looked at his hands and the champion's hands had nothing to say. Bruce was doing something else. Bruce was looking at the champion the way you look at a person who has just told you something honest. Not something impressive. Not something surprising. Something honest. Something that took effort to say. Something that cost the person something to reveal. Bruce was looking at the champion with. The man on the tatami said respect. The second link said respect. My father said, he said Bruce looked at the guy with respect. Real respect. Not the fake kind. Real respect. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about real respect because the difference between real respect and fake respect is the difference between the first face and the third face, the difference between the champion at second 1 and the champion at second 40. Fake respect is a performance. Fake respect is the bow at the beginning of the match, the bow that says, I acknowledge you, I honor the tradition, I observe the form. Fake respect is a shape. Real respect is a substance. Bruce looked at the champion with real respect. Bruce looked at the champion with the respect of a man who understood what the champion had just done, not the gripping, not the squeezing, not the pulling, not the technique. The champion had done something harder than all of that. The champion had continued. The champion had continued for 40 seconds. The champion had continued through the failure and through the confusion and through the third phase, and the champion had not quit and the champion had not let go until the champion had exhausted every option and the champion had given every answer he had and the answer was not enough and the champion had stayed. The champion had stayed for 40 seconds with his hands on a throat that did not respond to his hands, and the champion had stayed, and the staying was the thing that Bruce respected. Not the strength. Not the grip. Not the 240 pounds. The staying. Bruce looked at the champion with real respect and the champion looked at his hands and the room was silent and the moment lasted. The moment lasted the way a held note lasts. The musician has played the note and the note is in the air and the note is fading, but the note is not gone yet. The note is still here. The note is still vibrating. The room can still feel the note. The moment lasted like that. The 40 seconds were over, but the vibration of the 40 seconds was still in the room, in the tatami, in the beams, in the pale rectangles of light on the floor, in the thick menthol and sweat air, in the students' open mouths, in the instructor's uncrossed arms, because the arms had uncrossed. The second instructor, the one with the crossed arms, the one whose arms said show me, that instructor's arms were at his sides now, the arms having uncrossed at some point during the 40 seconds, the arms having received the showing they demanded and the showing having been sufficient and the arms having opened in the way that arms open when the body gives up its resistance to what the eyes are reporting. The moment lasted. And then Bruce spoke. Bruce spoke. I don't have the words. The chain didn't carry the words. The chain carried the tone. The chain carried the quality of the voice. The chain carried the fact that Bruce spoke and the fact that the voice was quiet and the fact that the voice was normal, the same voice Bruce would have used to order dinner or ask for directions or greet a friend. The voice was not a post-demonstration voice. The voice was not a post-triumph voice. The voice was not the voice of a man who had just done something extraordinary. The voice was the voice of a man continuing a conversation that the demonstration had been a part of, a parenthetical, an aside, a brief detour from the main discussion. Bruce spoke and the words were conversational and the tone was warm and the volume was low. I don't know what Bruce said. The chain didn't carry the content. The chain carried the container, the voice, the tone, the temperature. The chain carried the response. The champion nodded. The champion nodded and the nod was slow. The nod was the nod of a man who was agreeing, not with the words, necessarily, but with the situation. The nod was the champion's body saying, yes. Yes, that happened. Yes, I don't understand it. Yes, I am standing here with my empty hands and my 15 years and my national title and I am nodding because nodding is the thing I can do. Nodding is the response I have. I don't have a throw. I don't have a technique. I don't have a grip that works. I have a nod. The nod is mine. The nod is what I can offer. The champion nodded and the nod was real. And then the room began to move. The room began to move the way a frozen river begins to move in spring, slowly, creakingly, with the sound of ice breaking and the sound of water finding its way through the cracks. The students shifted on the tatami. One student exhaled, a second exhale, a private exhale, an exhale that was not the collective exhale of the room but the individual exhale of a single body releasing the last of its held breath. An instructor moved, the instructor in the dark hakama, the senior instructor, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the shift producing a small sound, the sound of a wooden floor receiving a redistributed load, and the sound was loud in the silence the way a cough is loud in a church. The room was waking up. The room was returning from wherever the room had been, from the 40 seconds, from the breath-held silence, from the photograph, from the painting. The room was returning to the world of people who breathe and move and shift their weight and make small sounds. The room was returning to normal. But normal had changed. Normal had changed because the room now contained a memory it didn't have 5 minutes ago. Normal had changed because every person in the room, every student, every instructor, the champion, the man on the tatami who would become the first link, every person now carried a piece of those 40 seconds in their body and the piece was heavy and the piece would not come out and the piece would change the shape of everything they saw from this moment forward. The champion would never grip a throat the same way. The students would never watch a demonstration the same way. The instructors would never evaluate a martial artist the same way. The man on the tatami would never tell a story the same way. Normal had changed. Bruce walked off the tatami. Bruce walked off the tatami the same way Bruce had walked onto the tatami, without marks. The tatami behind him was the same as the tatami in front of him. No dents. No compression. No record of his passing. 140 pounds walking on a surface that remembered a 240-pound man's footprints. Bruce put on his shoes. Bruce put on his shoes at the edge of the tatami. One foot, then the other. The same way he had taken them off, standing, not looking down, using one foot to assist the other. The shoes went on the same way the shoes had come off. The entrance was the exit. The beginning was the end. The symmetry was perfect. Bruce walked out. And behind him, on the tatami, in the air, in the silence that was slowly filling with the sounds of a room returning to life, behind him, the 40 seconds hung. The 40 seconds hung in the room like smoke. The 40 seconds hung the way a bell's ring hangs in a church after the bell has stopped moving. The metal is still, the rope is still, the bell is still, but the ring is still there. The ring is still in the air. The ring is still vibrating in the bones of the walls and the stones of the floor and the bodies of the people in the pews. The 40 seconds rang. The 40 seconds are still ringing. Now I can tell you about the throat. I've told you what happened. I've told you about the hands and the grip and the seconds and the three faces and the aftermath and the room and the silence. I've told you the what. Now I need to tell you the how. Not the how of the champion's how is simple, the champion's how is judo, the champion's how is 15 years of training applied through 2 hands to 1 throat. The champion's how is physics. The champion's how is force and leverage and mass and all of the things that can be measured with instruments and written on chalkboards. Bruce's how is not physics. Or, Bruce's how is physics, but it's physics of a different order. Bruce's how is the physics that exists underneath the physics. Bruce's how is the physics that the chalkboard can't hold. I'm going to try to explain it. I'm going to try to explain it the way my father explained it to me, not with science, not with anatomy, not with the technical vocabulary of martial arts. My father didn't have those vocabularies. My father had the vocabulary of a mechanic. My father had the vocabulary of a man who understood how things work by touching them and holding them and listening to the shape. My father said, "The engine doesn't fight the road." My father said that in the kitchen. Brown mug. Chipped rim. Coffee. My father said, "The engine doesn't fight the road. The engine moves the car. The road is just where the car is. The engine doesn't know about the road. The engine doesn't care about the road. The engine is doing its thing, firing, turning, producing motion, and the road is doing its thing, being flat, being there, being the surface, and the car moves because the engine and the road are doing their own things and the things happen to produce movement. But the engine and the road are not in a relationship. The engine is not pushing against the road. The engine is pushing. The road is there. That's it. My father said Bruce was the engine. The champion was the road. I didn't understand that when I was 14. I understand it now. Bruce was not resisting the champion. Bruce was not fighting the grip. Bruce was not opposing the force. Bruce was not pushing back against the pull. Bruce was not counter-rotating against the torque. Bruce was not doing anything to the champion. Bruce was doing something else. Bruce was doing his thing, standing, breathing, existing, being, and the champion was doing the champion's thing, gripping, squeezing, pulling, twisting, and the two things were not in a relationship. The two things were not in opposition. The two things were not connected. The champion was squeezing a throat that was not in a conversation with the champion's hands. The champion's hands were talking. The champion's hands were saying, move, compress, yield, break. The champion's hands were saying it louder and louder and louder. For 40 seconds, the champion's hands were screaming at Bruce's throat. And Bruce's throat was not listening, not ignoring, not refusing, not defiantly not listening, not covering its ears and saying la la la, not listening the way a mountain doesn't listen to the wind. The wind blows. The mountain is there. The wind is not having a conversation with the mountain. The wind is blowing. The mountain is being a mountain. The wind's opinion of the mountain is irrelevant because the mountain is not in the business of receiving opinions from wind. Bruce's throat was a mountain. The champion's hands were wind. My father said it differently. My father, being a mechanic, said, "You can't grip water. You can't grip water. Put your hands around a stream of water from a garden hose. Close your hands. Squeeze. What happens? The water doesn't stop. The water doesn't compress. The water doesn't yield. The water goes around your hands. The water goes through your fingers. The water continues to be water. Your grip, your strongest grip, your most desperate grip, your 15 years of judo grip, your grip is irrelevant to the water because the water is not in the category of things that respond to grips. The water is in its own category. The water is in the category of things that flow. Your grip is in the category of things that hold. The two categories do not intersect. Bruce Lee's throat was in a category that the champion's grip could not reach. Could not reach physically. The champion's hands were physically on the throat. The champion's fingers were physically wrapped around the neck. The champion's thumbs were physically pressing into the tissue. The contact was real. The grip was real. The force was real. But the effect, the expected effect, the assumed effect, the 15 years of judo guarantees this effect, the effect was not there. The effect was in a different category. The effect required the throat to be in the category of things that respond to grips, and Bruce Lee's throat was not in that category. I know this sounds mystical. I know this sounds like martial arts folklore. I know this sounds like the kind of story that people tell about Bruce Lee that involves words like chi and energy and internal power and all of the vocabulary that has been used and misused and overused and abused to turn Bruce Lee from a human being into a legend and the legend into a myth and the myth into a cartoon. This is not that. This is not chi, this is not energy. This is not mysticism. This is something else. This is something that the champion felt in his hands, something physical, something real, something that the champion's hands registered and reported and could not explain. The champion's hands felt a throat. The champion's hands felt muscle and skin and bone and trachea and all of the physical components of a human neck. The champion's hands felt those things. But the champion's hands also felt something else, something under the components, something behind the anatomy, something that was neither muscle nor bone nor skin but was structure. That's the closest word. Structure. Not the structure of anatomy, not the arrangement of muscles and bones and tendons. The structure of integration. The structure of a body that is not made of parts. The structure of a body that is one thing. Not 140 pounds of parts, not a neck attached to a torso attached to legs attached to feet attached to the ground. Not that. One thing. One single, continuous, undivided thing that begins at the soles of the feet and ends at the crown of the head and has no joints, no seams, no separations, no places where the structure can be entered and disrupted. The champion was gripping a throat. The champion thought he was gripping a throat. The champion was gripping a body. The champion was gripping the entire body. The champion's hands were on the throat, but the structure the champion's hands were encountering was not the throat. The structure the champion's hands were encountering was everything. Everything from the feet on the tatami to the head above the hands. The champion was not squeezing a throat. The champion was squeezing a system. The champion was trying to compress 140 pounds of integrated, unified, seamless structure through a contact point 3 inches wide, and the structure was not compressible because the structure was not local. The structure was everywhere. The structure was the whole body, expressing itself through the throat, receiving the champion's force through the throat, distributing the champion's force through the throat to the entire system. The way a net distributes force, you push on one knot and the push goes everywhere. The push goes to every other knot. The push becomes smaller and smaller as it spreads, and by the time the push has reached the edges of the net, the push is nothing. The champion was pushing on one knot. The push was going everywhere. The push was becoming nothing. 40 seconds of a judo champion's best effort, distributed through a seamless structure, becoming nothing. That is the how. That is not mysticism. That is not chi, that is engineering. That is the engineering of a body that has been trained not to be strong, not to be tough, not to be hard, but to be one. To be unified. To be a single structure with no gaps, no seams, no separations. A body that is one thing the way water is one thing. You can touch it but you can't grip it. You can push it but you can't move it. You can apply force to it, but the force goes in and the force disappears because the thing you're applying force to is not a thing. It's a system. And the system is bigger than your hands. The champion's hands were on a system. The champion's hands thought they were on a throat. The system didn't bother to correct them. 100 pounds. I keep coming back to this number. 100 pounds. The difference. The gap. The canyon between the champion's 240 and Bruce's 140. 100 pounds. In any grappling art, judo, wrestling, sambo, jiu-jitsu, 100 pounds is not a difference. 100 pounds is a verdict. 100 pounds is the margin at which technique becomes irrelevant and physics becomes law. 100 pounds means the bigger body wins. 100 pounds means the smaller body loses. 100 pounds is what happens when you put a car on one side of a seesaw and a bicycle on the other. The car does not go up. The car never goes up. The car has never in the history of seesaws gone up when a bicycle is on the other side. 100 pounds. The champion was the car. Bruce was the bicycle. The seesaw was the throat. The car should have sent the bicycle to the ceiling. The car should have pinned the bicycle against the sky. The car should have done what cars do on seesaws, sit there, heavy, immovable, permanent, while the lighter thing on the other end does whatever the lighter thing does, which is, go where the car sends it. The bicycle didn't move. The car pushed and the bicycle didn't move. I need you to feel the weight of this, because the weight of this is the weight of the story. The weight of this is the thing the chain carried. The chain didn't carry Bruce Lee's achievement, the chain carried the champion's failure. And the champion's failure was not a failure of effort or a failure of technique or a failure of will. The champion's failure was a failure of physics. The champion brought 100 extra pounds to a contest of force, and the 100 extra pounds were not enough. The champion brought the car to the seesaw and the car did not go down. The champion brought the weight and the weight was nothing. The weight was nothing. The champion's 100 extra pounds, the 100 pounds of muscle and bone and training that gave the champion a numerical advantage that should have been, in any rational universe, decisive. The champion's 100 extra pounds arrived at Bruce Lee's throat, and the champion's 100 extra pounds were processed by Bruce Lee's structure, and the champion's 100 extra pounds were distributed through the net, and the champion's 100 extra pounds arrived at the edges of the net as nothing, as zero, as the memory of force, as the ghost of weight. 100 pounds became nothing. I want to say that differently. I want to say it the way my father would have said it. My father would have said, "It doesn't matter how big the hammer is if you're hitting water. It doesn't matter how big the hammer is if you're hitting water." The champion was a big hammer. The champion was the biggest hammer in American Judo, 240 pounds of national-level hammer. The champion swung. The champion hit. And the thing the champion hit was water. The thing the champion hit absorbed the swing, and the thing the champion hit absorbed the weight, and the thing the champion hit was exactly the same after the hitting as it was before the hitting. The hammer hit. The water was water. The hammer was confused. 100 pounds of advantage. 0 pounds of effect. The arithmetic of this, the simple, brutal, undeniable arithmetic, is the thing that the chain carried with the most weight. The chain carried the 40 seconds. The chain carried the 3 faces. The chain carried the throat and the hands and the silence and the room. But the chain carried the arithmetic heaviest. The chain carried the numbers 240 versus 140, 100 pounds of difference, 40 seconds of effort, 0 result, and the numbers were the heaviest thing in the chain because numbers are the thing we trust. Numbers are the thing we build our certainty on. Numbers are the load-bearing walls of our understanding of the physical world. Weight beats weight. More beats less. Bigger beats smaller. These are not opinions. These are not styles. These are numbers. And the numbers said, the champion wins. The numbers said it loudly. The numbers said it unanimously. The numbers said it with the full authority of every number that has ever been a number. And the numbers were wrong. The numbers were wrong for 40 seconds. The numbers were wrong in front of 6 or 8 students and 2 instructors and 1 man on the tatami who would become the first link. The numbers were wrong on a tatami in Los Angeles in the late 1960s, and the wrongness of the numbers was so complete, so total, so absolute that the wrongness became its own kind of evidence. The wrongness became proof, not proof that the numbers are always wrong, not proof that weight doesn't matter, not proof that physics is a lie, proof that there exists, somewhere in the spectrum of human capability, a point at which the numbers stop applying. A point at which 240 and 140 are just numbers, and the thing that determines the outcome is not the numbers but something else. Something that the numbers cannot measure. Something that the numbers do not have a column for. Something that exists in the space between the numbers, where the numbers are silent and the silence is the sound of a different kind of physics, a physics that does not live on chalkboards, a physics that lives in the throat of a man who weighs 140 pounds and cannot be moved by a man who weighs 100 pounds more. Something that lives in the throat. That something, whatever it is, whatever name it does or doesn't have, whatever science or art or practice produces it, that something is the reason this story exists. That something is the reason the chain exists. That something is the reason a man on a tatami saw a thing he couldn't explain and told another man who told my father who told me. That something is the reason you're reading this. Not the grip. Not the champion. Not the judo. Not the dojo. The something. The something in the throat. The something that turned 100 pounds of advantage into nothing. The something that made a judo champion look at his own hands like a stranger. The something that lived in Bruce Lee's body the way gravity lives in the earth, not as an effort, not as a technique, not as a skill, but as a property. As a feature. As a fact of the body's existence. Bruce Lee's body had a property that the champion's hands could not address. And the champion, standing on the tatami with his empty hands and his slow nod and his 15 years of training and his 240 pounds of suddenly irrelevant body, the champion felt the property. The champion felt it in his fingers. The champion felt it in his thumbs. The champion felt it in the space between his palms where the throat lived, and the throat was warm and the throat was soft and the throat was real and the throat was absolutely, completely, incomprehensibly immovable. The champion felt the something. And the champion let go. And the champion looked at his hands. And the champion's hands had nothing to say. Stories die. I need to tell you this because you need to understand what this story has survived. Stories die. Stories die all the time. Stories die the way candles die. The flame gets smaller and the wax gets shorter, and at some point the flame touches the table and there is nothing left to burn and the flame goes out and the story is gone. Stories die in parking lots after funerals. Stories die in nursing homes at 3 in the morning. Stories die in the space between a father's last breath and the silence that follows. Stories die, and when stories die, the thing that happened, the thing the story was carrying, the thing the story was keeping alive, the thing dies too. Not the fact. The fact might survive in a newspaper or a photograph or a video. But the story, the version that was carried in a voice, the version that was shaped by hands, the version that smelled like coffee and sounded like a father, that version dies. This story almost died. This story almost died 4 times. The first time this story almost died was in the dojo. The first time this story almost died was the moment the 40 seconds ended and the room exhaled and the students shifted on the tatami and the instructors uncrossed their arms and the moment began to dissolve, the way all moments dissolve. The way all present tenses become past tenses, the way the thing that is happening becomes the thing that happened, and the thing that happened begins to lose resolution, begins to blur, begins to soften at the edges the way a photograph softens when you hold it in your hands for too many years. The 40 seconds almost dissolved. The 40 seconds almost became a thing that happened, a thing that the students remembered vaguely, a thing that the instructors mentioned occasionally, a thing that lost its edges and its details and its weight with every passing month until the thing was not a memory but a feeling, not a story but a sensation, not 40 seconds but a blur. But the man on the tatami would not let it dissolve. The man on the tatami, the first link, the witness, the painter who watched the champion's face with total attention, the man on the tatami held the 40 seconds. Held them the way you hold a butterfly, gently, carefully, with the awareness that the thing you're holding is alive and fragile and will be destroyed by the wrong kind of pressure. The man on the tatami held the 40 seconds, and the man on the tatami did something that most witnesses don't do. The man on the tatami replayed. The man on the tatami, in the hours and days after the demonstration, replayed the 40 seconds, not casually, not as a pastime, but deliberately, systematically, the way a musician replays a performance, the way a painter replays a face. The man on the tatami replayed the 40 seconds, and each replay reinforced the details, and each reinforcement deepened the grooves, and each deepened groove made the memory more durable, more permanent, more resistant to the erosion that kills most memories within weeks. The man on the tatami kept the 40 seconds alive. The first near-death survived. The second time this story almost died was in the telling. The second time this story almost died was the moment the first link told the second link. Because telling is dangerous. Telling is the moment when the story leaves one body and enters another, and the crossing, the space between the telling mouth and the listening ear, the crossing is where most stories lose something. a detail, a texture, a temperature. The story crosses from one body to another, and the new body is a different shape than the old body, and the story has to reshape itself to fit, and the reshaping changes the story, and the changed story is not the original story, and the distance between the original and the copy grows with every crossing. The man on the tatami told the second link. And the second link, whoever the second link was, whatever martial art the second link practiced, whatever room the second link was standing in when the first link opened his mouth and the 40 seconds crossed the space between them, the second link received the story, and the second link held the story, and the second link did not drop it. The second link held the throat. The second link held the 3 faces. The second link held the arms at the sides. The second link held the 40 seconds. The second near-death survived. The third time this story almost died was the longest death. The third time was the years. The third time was the gap between the second link receiving the story and my father hearing the story, a gap of months or years, I don't know. The chain didn't carry the calendar. During those months or years, the story lived in the second link's pocket. The story lived the way a stone lives in a pocket, present, tangible, findable, but silent. The story was not being told during those months or years. The story was being carried. And carrying is not the same as telling. Carrying is the act of holding a story without sharing it, the act of keeping a story alive in a body that has not yet found the right ear. Carrying is lonelier than telling. Carrying is the story sitting in the dark, waiting for a mouth to say it and an ear to hear it. The second link carried the story. The second link carried it until the second link met my father. The second link met my father, and the second link opened the pocket, and the second link said something. I don't know what the second link said first. I don't know what the preamble was. I don't know if the second link said, "Let me tell you something," or "Have you ever heard about," or "You won't believe this," or nothing at all. Just started, just opened the mouth, and the story fell out the way a stone falls out of a pocket when you reach for your keys. The second link told my father. And my father in his workshop or his kitchen or his car or wherever my father was when the second link's mouth opened and the story crossed, my father received the story. And my father held the story. And my father carried the story. My father carried the story for years. My father carried the story the way my father carried everything, quietly, patiently, in the deep pockets of a man who did not speak often but who, when he spoke in complete structures. My father did not tell fragments. My father did not tell anecdotes. My father told architectures. My father's stories had foundations and load-bearing walls and roofs and windows, and the windows let in exactly the right amount of light. My father's stories were built the way my father's workshop was built, everything in its place, the place mattering more than the thing. My father carried the story, and the story lived in my father's pockets the way the stone lived in the second link's pocket, present, tangible, findable, silent. Waiting. The third near death was the years my father carried the story without telling it. The third near death survived. The fourth time this story almost died was the kitchen table. The fourth time was the Saturday morning. Or the Sunday morning. The brown mug. The chipped rim. The coffee. The quiet house. The fourth time was the moment my father sat down and my father opened his mouth, and the 40 seconds crossed the space between my father's mouth and my ears, and the story entered my body, and the story has lived in my body ever since. The fourth time this story almost died was the moment before my father told me. Because my father almost didn't tell me. I know this because of the way my father started. My father started with a pause. My father started with the pause that my father always used when my father was deciding whether to speak, the pause that lived between the thought and the word, the pause that was my father's quality control, my father's inspection of the thing before the thing left the workshop. My father paused. My father looked at the mug. My father looked at the coffee. My father looked at the chip on the rim. And my father I could see it, I could feel it, I could feel the way you feel a train passing through a wall. My father almost put the mug down and stood up and walked to the workshop, and the story would have stayed in the pocket. The story would have died in the pocket. But my father spoke. My father said, "Let me tell you about the time a judo champion grabbed Bruce Lee by the throat. And the fourth near-death survived. And the story entered me. And the story has lived in me for decades. And the story has lived in my pocket, present, tangible, findable, silent. The stone in the pocket. The hand going back to it. The fingers finding the shape. And I have carried it the way the second link carried it, and the way my father carried it, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right ear, waiting for the right room. And now the story is crossing again. And now the story is leaving my mouth and entering your eyes, and the crossing is happening now, in this sentence, in this word, and the story is reshaping itself to fit your body the way it reshaped itself to fit my body and my father's body and the second link's body and the first link's body. 4 links. 4 crossings. 4 near-deaths. 1 story. Still alive. Still ringing. I want to talk about my father's hands. I want to talk about my father's hands because my father's hands are the reason I understood this story. Not when I heard it. When I heard it, I was young and I understood the surface, I understood the grip and the throat and the 40 seconds and the champion who couldn't move Bruce Lee. I understood the what. But the how that I tried to explain in the chapter about the throat, the how of the water and the net and the system and the unified body, the how came later. The how came from my father's hands. My father's hands were thick. Not the way the champion's hands were thick, not the thickness of grip training, not the thickness of judo. My father's hands were thick the way a mechanic's hands are thick, the thickness of wrenches and ratchets and bolts and the persistent, daily, decades-long act of holding tools and turning tools and using tools on machines. My father's hands had a topography, a landscape of calluses and scars and stains, and the skin was the color of a hand that has been washed 10,000 times and has never come fully clean. My father's hands knew things. My father's hands knew the difference between a bolt that is tight and a bolt that is over-tight. My father's hands knew the difference between a gasket that is sealed and a gasket that is about to fail. My father's hands knew the difference between a part that is working and a part that is working for now. My father's hands had a sensitivity that my father's hands did not advertise. The hands looked rough, looked brutal, looked like the hands of a man who could not feel anything smaller than a wrench. But the hands could feel everything. The hands could feel 1,000th of an inch of play in a bearing. The hands could feel the heat signature of a wire that was carrying too much current. The hands could feel the future, the failure that had not happened yet, the break that was coming, the crack that was invisible to the eye but palpable to the fingers. My father's hands could feel what was coming. My father told me once in the workshop, not the kitchen, the workshop, with the pegboard and the tools and the concrete floor, my father told me, a good mechanic doesn't fix things. A good mechanic listens to things. The fixing happens after the listening. But the listening is the thing. The listening is where the work lives. A good mechanic listens to things. My father listened with his hands. And when my father told me the story of the throat, when my father sat at the kitchen table with the brown mug and the chipped rim and told me about the champion's hands on Bruce's throat and the 40 seconds and the 3 faces and the arms at the sides, when my father told me that story, my father told it with his hands. My father's hands moved while my father talked. My father's hands opened and closed. My father's hands gripped the air. My father's hands demonstrated the champion's grip, the thumbs pressing into an invisible throat, the fingers wrapping around an invisible neck. My father's hands showed me what the champion's hands did. And then my father's hands showed me what happened. My father gripped the air, gripped it hard, gripped it the way the champion gripped Bruce's throat, and then my father's face changed. My father's face did something that I did not understand at the time and that I understand now. My father's face did a version of the third face. Not the same face. My father had not been in the dojo, my father had not felt the throat, my father was not the champion. But my father's face did a version of the third face, a small version, a distant version, an echo of the face the champion made at second 30. My father's face did the face of a man who was holding something, and the something is not responding to the holding, and the not responding is teaching the man something about the limits of holding. My father's hands were gripping the air and the air was not responding, and my father's face was the face of a man who understood, through his hands. Through his 30 years of listening to things with his hands, my father's face was the face of a man who understood what the champion's hands had felt. My father understood the throat. Not because my father was a martial artist. Not because my father had trained. Not because my father knew Judo or Wing Chun or Jeet Kune Do. My father understood the throat because my father was a mechanic. My father understood the throat because my father had spent 30 years holding things and listening to things and feeling the difference between a thing that is made of parts and a thing that is one thing. My father had felt that difference in engines, the engine that runs because the parts are working and the engine that runs because the engine is working, the difference between an assembly and a machine, the difference between a collection and a system. My father understood the throat because the throat was a system. And my father, holding the air in his thick, scarred, permanently stained hands, my father looked at me across the kitchen table and my father said the thing that I have carried in my pocket for longer than any other sentence my father ever spoke. My father said, his body wasn't a body. His body was one thing. Like an engine that was running right. Every part was there, but the parts weren't parts anymore. The parts were the engine. And the engine was running and you couldn't stop it by grabbing one piece because the piece wasn't a piece. The piece was the whole thing. You'd have to stop the whole thing. And you can't stop the whole thing from the outside. You can't stop an engine by squeezing a hose. The engine doesn't know you're squeezing the hose. The engine is running. The engine will always be running. The engine is running. The engine will always be running. My father said that and my father put the mug down and the mug made a sound on the table, a small sound, a ceramic onwood sound, a period at the end of a sentence, and my father was done. My father had said the thing. My father had carried the thing in his pocket for years and the thing was out of the pocket and the thing was on the table between us and the thing was mine now. The engine is running. I started this story with an image. 2 hands on a throat. Arms at the sides. A calm face above white knuckles. I told you to carry the image. I told you I was going to leave the image and I told you the image doesn't leave. I told you the image stays. I told you every word I said would be walking back to this image. We're here. We're back at the image. 2 hands on a throat. Arms at the sides. A calm face above white knuckles. A dojo in Los Angeles in the late 1960s. Tatami on the floor. Beams overhead. Rice paper screens letting light fall in pale rectangles. The smell of sweat and menthol and compressed straw. Students seated along the far wall. Instructors standing behind them. One man on the tatami, the first link, the witness, the keeper. The image is here. And now I need to tell you the thing I haven't told you. The thing I've been circling for 10 chapters. The thing that the chain carried underneath the throat and the hands and the 40 seconds and the 3 faces and the room and the silence. The thing that the chain carried at the bottom, the heaviest thing, the deepest thing, the thing that sank to the floor of the chain and stayed there and every link felt the weight of it and no link spoke it. The thing is this. Bruce Lee was not demonstrating strength. Bruce Lee was not demonstrating technique. Bruce Lee was not demonstrating martial arts. Bruce Lee was demonstrating something about being human. Something about what a human body can become. Something about what is possible. I know that sounds large. I know that sounds like hyperbole. I know that sounds like the kind of thing that people say about Bruce Lee because Bruce Lee has become a symbol and symbols attract large statements the way mountains attract clouds. I know that. But this is not a large statement. This is a small statement about a large thing. The small statement is this: a man stood still. That's it. That's the total content of the 40 seconds. A man stood still. A man stood still while another man gripped his throat and squeezed and pulled and twisted and drove 240 pounds of trained force into the most vulnerable point on the human body. A man stood still while all of that happened and the man's arms stayed at his sides and the man's face stayed calm and the man's body stayed vertical and the man did not move. A man stood still. The large thing that the small statement points toward, the large thing that lives behind the standing still, the large thing is this. The standing still was not resistance. The standing still was not effort. The standing still was not the product of training, or if it was the product of training, it was the product of a kind of training that goes past the body and into the space where the body and the mind are not two things but one thing, and the one thing is not working, the one thing is not trying, the one thing is simply being what it is, the way a tree is what it is, the way water is what it is, the way a mountain is what it is. Bruce Lee was being what he was. And what he was could not be moved by hands. What he was could not be moved by weight. What he was could not be moved by force or technique or experience or titles or 15 years of national-level judo. What he was could not be moved. Not because what he was strong. Not because what he was tough. Not because what he was hard or rigid or resistant. But because what he was complete. What he was whole. What he was a body that had become so integrated, so unified, so seamless, so thoroughly one thing that the body had stopped being a collection of parts that could be attacked individually and had become a system that could only be addressed in total. And the champion, with his 2 hands on the throat, with his 240 pounds, with his 15 years, with his national title, the champion could not address the total. The champion could address the throat. The champion could not address the system. The throat was a window into the system. The throat was a point of contact. The throat was where the champion's hands met Bruce Lee's body. But the throat was not the thing. The throat was the surface. The thing the champion was trying to move, the thing the champion's hands were trying to compress, the thing the champion's 240 pounds were trying to displace, the thing was everything. The thing was the whole body. The thing was 140 pounds of man who had become one thing, and the one thing was standing on the tatami, and the tatami was part of it, and the ground under the tatami was part of it, and the air in the room was part of it, and the silence was part of it, and the 40 seconds were part of it. Everything was part of it. And the champion, with his 2 hands, was trying to move everything. The champion could not move everything. Nobody can move everything. I'm almost done. I'm almost done, and I want to end where I started. I want to end with the image. I want to end with 2 hands on a throat and arms at the sides and a calm face above white knuckles. But I want to add something to the image. I want to add the thing that the chain added, the thing that each link contributed, the thing that the image did not have when it left the dojo, and the thing that the image had when it arrived at my kitchen table. The image left the dojo as a feat. The image arrived at my kitchen table as a question. The question is not, how did Bruce Lee do that? The question is not, can I do that? The question is not, what technique produces that result? The question is, what was Bruce Lee? Not who. What? What was the thing that stood on the tatami and received the champion's hands and did not move? What was the thing that weighed 140 pounds and could not be displaced by 240? What was the thing that overrode the oldest reflex in the human body, the hands-to-throat reflex, the panic reflex, the million-year-old wiring? What was the thing that heard the signal and said no? What was the thing? The chain doesn't answer this question. The chain carries the question. The chain has been carrying the question for more than 50 years, from the man on the tatami to the second link to my father to me to you. The chain has been carrying the question the way a river carries a stone, not to a destination, not to a resolution, but downstream. Always downstream. The stone gets smoother. The stone gets smaller. But the stone does not dissolve. The stone arrives at each new pair of hands, and the stone is still a stone, and the question is still a question, and the question has no answer. What was Bruce Lee? I don't know. My father didn't know. The second link didn't know. The man on the tatami didn't know. The champion, standing on the tatami with his empty hands and his slow nod in his face that had been 3 faces in 40 seconds, the champion didn't know. The students didn't know. The instructors didn't know. Nobody in that room knew. Nobody in the chain knew. Nobody knows. But everybody felt it. Everybody felt the question. Everybody felt the weight of the question. Everybody felt the stone in the pocket, the question stone, the what was he stone, the stone that the fingers keep finding and the fingers keep turning and the stone keeps saying, I don't have an answer. I have a shape. Feel the shape. The shape is the closest thing to an answer you're going to get. Feel the shape. The shape is 2 hands on a throat. The shape is arms at the sides. The shape is 40 seconds. The shape is a man who did not move. The room is quiet now. The dojo is quiet. The dojo is probably gone, demolished, converted, repurposed, turned into a yoga studio or a coffee shop or a parking lot. The tatami is gone. The beams are gone. The rice paper screens are gone. The pale rectangles of light are gone. The smell of sweat and menthol and compressed straw is gone. The students are old now or gone. The instructors are gone. The champion is old now or gone. The man on the tatami, the first link, the witness, the keeper, the man on the tatami is old now or gone. The second link is old now or gone. My father is gone. My father is gone, and the brown mug is gone, and the chipped rim is gone, and the coffee is gone, and the kitchen table is in a house that other people live in now, and the workshop has been emptied, and the pegboard has been cleared, and the tools are in boxes, and my father's hands, my father's thick, scarred, permanently stained hands, The hands that held things and listened to things and understood the difference between a collection and a system, my father's hands are gone. But the story is here. The story is here because the chain held. The story is here because 4 links, 4 imperfect, human, mortal links, carried a stone through decades of silence, and each link held the stone, and each link passed the stone, and each link added something to the stone, a detail, a texture, a temperature, a pause, a metaphor about engines and water and hammers and hoses, and the stone arrived here, in this sentence, in this word, in this moment where you and I are standing on either side of a crossing and the stone is crossing. The story is crossing. The story is leaving my body and entering yours. And now you have a stone in your pocket. And your hand will go back to it. Your fingers will find the shape. And the shape will say, 2 hands on a throat. 40 seconds. Arms at his sides. A man who did not move. And the shape will ask, what was he? And you will not have an answer. And the not having will be the having. And the question will be the point. One last thing. One last thing, and then I'm done. One last thing about the silence. The silence after the 40 seconds, the silence in the dojo, the silence that fell over the room like a sheet over a body, that silence was not an absence. That silence was not the silence of nothing happening. That silence was the silence of something having happened that was too large for sound. That silence was the sound that the world makes when the world has been shown something about itself that the world did not know. The world is quiet for a moment. The world holds the new information. The world turns the new information over in its hands the way my father turned a part over in his hands. The world looks at the new information. The world tries to hear the shape. The silence after the 40 seconds was the world hearing the shape. The silence has been going on for more than 50 years. The silence is still going on. The silence is the sound of a throat that did not move. The silence is the sound of hands that had nothing to say. The silence is the sound of a man on a tatami who saw a thing he could not name and carried the thing he could not name through a chain of hands to a kitchen table where a mechanic held a chipped mug and told his son about a throat. The silence is the sound of this story. And this story is the sound of the silence. And the silence. The silence is still here. Listen.